Welcome back to Disquisitiv. Remember our players who are here in the infinite game. Hi, Baven. Hi, Sada. We are just 2 days away from Election Day and Indigenous Peoples Day. I'm really actually super excited that I actually get to cast my ballot for an Indigenous woman on Indigenous Peoples Day.
Like Michaela said, like, what a cool experience in this lifetime, finally, to be able to vote for an Indigenous candidate on Indigenous Peoples Day. Very exciting time. So let's celebrate together.
Very exciting. Thank you, Baven. Sada, hello. We missed you so much last week. It's so good to see you again.
Yeah, I can't believe this is our last episode, and I've been learning so much from you. I'm excited for this conversation today. And I'm sorry that Ben left during the last session. What happened?
Yeah, it was a little unfortunate. It wasn't the conversation that I think we all are capable of having. Actually, as I'm saying this, he's here. Ben is back. So it's like you conjured him, Sada.
I wasn't sure I would be coming back because that's how I felt when I left. But I realized that the reason I'm here is to hear and be heard. And by leaving, that would undermine that approach. So I'm happy to be back, and I'm happy that despite my rude departure, y'all are open to having me back, and I am appreciative, and I am also regretful that I did that, and so I apologize. I apologize for that behavior because that undermines what we're trying to do here. So honestly, I rewatched the episode that we did last week, and in listening and stepping outside of it, it got me thinking, and I decided to look into some of what y'all were calling privilege and talking about my privilege. And my consensus or my discoveries are that, I don't know yet about how reparations would work or how I would feel given how they would work, but I can recognize that I, as a apparently white male, do enjoy a certain privilege and have certainly, going back in my family's history, enjoyed it increasingly. And so I'm accepting of that. I own that. And I also want to, more importantly, I think, or just as importantly, underline the fact that these kind of disagreements are what has divided us and stagnated our growth. And that's, again, going full circle now, that's why I'm here, so that we can keep talking. And we can hear each other and try to understand each other. I might not agree with everything that y'all believe, but I agree that something needs to change. And acknowledging the past, I think, will help to move forward and change the future. So that being said, I want to say that I am currently on the land of the Ohlone people. I'm not sure if I said that correctly. And that my ancestors played a role in racism and in climate change. And I'm not sure if my direct ancestors stole any land from indigenous people, but at some point, my land, the land that my family occupies now, was taken from I looked it up, it was the Tawakaro people in central Texas. And I also acknowledge that my family has benefited from systems that were created, yes, mostly by European men, like my great-great-great-grandfather, and therefore have historically benefited people like me in the cases where families were able to keep their assets in their family through the generations. And a lot of laws and systems, all the while, were racist, some intentionally and others, just the way things worked, social mores. And even today, although we don't see racism all the time as blatant and obvious, or at least I don't. That these are things that still affect all of us as a society today.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Ben, for coming back and for that really thoughtful apology, and for also taking the time to do your own research. You know, that speaks volumes to the type of person that you are. And I'm so grateful that you're here in the space. Even if we aren't going to agree on everything, we are all here for change. And I really, really, really appreciate you taking this very seriously. And
Absolutely.
you
That's
mentioned,
what I'm
thank
here
you.
for.
Yeah, I really appreciate that.
I don't know who I'm going to vote for. I'm very unclear on which party I want to support. I mean, I do recognize, having stepped back, that More has a lot of platforms that I can get excited about. And I think some of my prejudices and biases did, in the back of my subconscious mind, make me discard her as a candidate. Whereas now I'm trying to really embrace her as a possibility. So those are some things that I'm thinking, that I'm working through.
That's wonderful. I wanted to take some time to share a couple of videos that Stage More released this week that'll help inform our conversation. So we're going to play those now.
Tattooed, too young, law school dropout who's been arrested. People say I'm not presidential material, but look where presidential material got us. But we are resilient. We've made it through pandemics and climate disasters, but we see more than just surviving for our future.
I see more economic justice,
more empathy,
racial equity, global solidarity in our future.
For our future.
In our future.
Join the resilience. America, we are just days away from a historic election. If a nation cannot face its past, it has no future. It is time for radical change. This election is a wake-up call and an opportunity. And the only way we can succeed is to focus on shared values like freedom and justice. It's time to make sure that solutions are being developed to benefit all people and our planet, not just the wealthy and powerful. It is possible. It is time to hold this nation's government accountable to the principles it proclaims to be founded on. All men are created equal with inalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. For centuries, that declaration excluded Indigenous people, women, LGBTQIA+ people, immigrants, Black people, and so many more. We do not accept that. We demand the right to pursue joy. I invite you to join me in the fight for liberty and justice, not just for some, but for all of us. Vote for me. Vote for us. Vote for more.
Oh, you acknowledged some things, Ben, about the past. And I wanted to open up the conversation for Sada and Baven, and also, me, for us to acknowledge the things in the past that we do need to face in order to progress in the future. So what are some things, from the past that we want to acknowledge?
I'm excited. I love this platform so much. I love More's platform because I just feel like, as you just said, we need to acknowledge the past in order to move forward into the future. We have to acknowledge that we're still amending a document that originally determined that Black slaves only counted as 3/5 of a person, right? Like, a Black person in America was not even considered a whole human being. They were considered a fraction of a human being. Especially when it came to calculating the number of government representatives that a state could get. And if they were honest, I'm sure they wouldn't have counted them at all.
As Ben mentioned, I think earlier, that some racism is intentional or unintentional. I mean, I think all racism is intentional, but it's either how clearly we can see it as racism.
I'm curious, what led you here how did you become like a part of the Wide Awakes? Because I'm interested. Would you mind sharing how that happened?
Yeah, I'm happy to share. This has all been a very big lesson, a big kind of culture shock to me. I always considered myself quite open-minded, quite progressive. And I believe that I am compared to where I'm from. Just a small anecdote, back in school, back when I was living at home, there was a lot of contention swirling around climate change and whether or not human beings were a cause of the warming planet. And the contention was that I believed in science, and my family, my father specifically, much of my family and extended family was in denial or found it inconvenient. And they were probably biased because of financial investments as well as their community, our community in Central Texas. And that was part of the, I think, the foundation for me being open enough to move to San Francisco and seek resources in a different place with a more scientifically minded, futuristic facing perspective. And here I landed thinking that I would find like-minded people. And that's not to say that we're completely not like-minded, but certainly I've landed here to find myself in a bit of a wake-up call. But I think, does that start to answer your question? I thought I was a progressive, and compared to y'all, I guess I'm just another closed-minded conservative. But I'm happy that y'all are hearing me out, and then that makes me want to hear y'all out.
For me, it makes me feel hopeful. Disquisitiv is a great place for these conversations to happen because of the agreements that we make with each other and with ourselves. You get in your own echo chamber sometimes. My awareness of other things, I notice, becomes limited as I don't expose myself to it as much, because I don't know if you and I on the street would be able to ever come to, we need this facilitation. And I feel like if that is something that people can be aware of and seek that out, or if that's more accessible, then maybe we can, as communities, as global citizens, as citizens in our communities and in the US, wherever, can have these deep conversations and can come to places of understanding if we, have access to whatever we need to create that environment for it to happen. So I'm glad you're here. I've learned a lot listening to your perspective, and it's been eye-opening for me too. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, sometimes we need to be disoriented, sometimes we need to be put in new positions and in new spaces. So, while this may have been dizzying for you, Ben, it does seem that you have done a lot of work and learned a lot and done a lot of unlearning. And while that can, really, really be difficult and frustrating and hard, and, it's really hard to believe in one thing and have that changed or have that questioned when it's been your lifelong belief. But, that's why we are all here. We're here to insist on the future, to insist on community. This is the end of the 2032 activation. So I wanted to, ask, what have we learned together since we've been here? I've learned so much about, ranked choice voting, and also just, I'm not an Indigenous person. And so, being a huge fan and believer in Sage Moore, I've done a lot of research on Indigenous practices. And I've also learned in my coursework that a lot of restorative justice techniques, which is what I am majoring in, are rooted in Indigenous practices. And what it means to be a steward of the land, and what it means to be in community and be a keeper of those types of things. So yeah, Sada and Baven, Ben has shared so much about what he's learned, and I want to know about what y'all have learned since we've been together.
Yeah, beautiful. I also learned a lot about Indigenous practices, especially, with how Indigenous people would find incredible ways to treat the land. And whenever they would move, because they would keep moving, they would never do anything to harm the land, and they kept the ecosystem pretty functional. And it's opposite to what we've been doing to the land to just gain profits. It made me reflect a lot as well on my culture and find the similarities in what we've gone through.
Thanks for sharing all that, Sada. That's I see the value and try to do my best to hold as many stories as possible, and And that was going to lead me to say that one of the main things that I've learned here is just reiterating how important it is to really hold space to listen to people's stories if you can, right? Like knowing where you are in space and time, in your mind, in your body, in your soul, in your spirit, or whatever, to be able to hold space for that. And I feel like I learned a lot about what my personal limits are and how maybe I can work more to hold space for people's stories, and knowing my own and caring for my own and my families and that heritage and that lineage. And then, yeah, just how to communicate with people, how to have tough conversations, how to really focus on facilitating those conversations. And it's reinvigorated and inspired me to like continue to work to do more of that. So like I said, people can come to understanding, so people can hear each other, people can show up with curiosity and openness and drop judgments, especially on subjects that they feel like they have a personal stake in, or that their personal identity is tied up in. And then the other thing that I've been really excited to learn a lot about is ranked choice voting as well. You know, it's been around for a little while, and now I'm just super excited to learn more about it and to use it. I think it's going to be really effective. I think I'm just really excited for the future. I feel much more excited to vote this year than I ever have before. And that's one of the reasons why.
You both said some really important things about how important it is to acknowledge the past in order for us to move on in the future, and being, you know, visionary and not reactionary, and how we can have these conversations in a forum and in a space in which everyone is heard, and we're listening with the intent to understand. And so I really appreciate y'all for being in this space. And, you know, it's not just about like voting is great. It's the what's the Gloria Steinem quote? Voting is not the most you can do, it's the least.
It's the least, yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Quote.
So we need to vote, and we need to vote for candidates that fight for racial justice and insist on dismantling these systems of oppression, not reforming them, you know, abolition on the platform.
I think also people resist change. People are afraid of what already they thought worked for them or was working kind of. And that's why people voted for Karen Anderson. I believe she represented the establishment.
What baffles me is that social media platforms add the link to election info on every post, but people are still confused. Like it feels like social media is not helping.
I know like a lot has been done to address like specifically like voter suppression after a lot of like the 2020 protests after the election. You know, there are a lot of reduced polling places because of the pandemic. And so there's some stuff that has, you know, happened that has changed. Like all eligible voters are automatically registered. You don't have to worry about that. There's a standard for a minimum number of polling places.
I'm not sure how I feel about what I predict for ranked choice voting. I mean, just because people are more comfortable voting for an independent candidate now that they can have more than one choice doesn't change the fact that people are still just so used to voting for these two main parties. And these two parties, they have a huge advantage. You know, they have bigger budgets, they have bigger bases, they have longer history. I think it's a bit naive to think that ranked choice voting will save our democracy. I mean, Sage Moore is not really likely to win. I mean, she has a better shot than maybe other third-party candidates ever did now with the ranked choice voting, but without the backing of one of the two parties, I can't even imagine that she's going to get a real shot at the majority, even with this ranked choice voting.
I agree with what you're saying, Ben. Like, it's not a magic button. And the reality of it is, you know, Moore might not win. But even if she doesn't, it's a notable step in the right direction to be able to finally vote for someone who you feel like truly aligns with your values. So for me, it's the first time in my voting life that I feel like I can say, like, yes, that candidate represents me. They are for me. The values that I align with, I feel like will be represented in leadership. I'm just excited for candidate Moore because she is visionary, not reactionary. And we need so much more of that in our leadership.
Yeah, for sure. Unfortunately, we are almost at time, but there are a few things that I really want to drive home before we kind of close out, especially because we are about to reach an election. So, we need to not only think about presidents, we need to think about electing progressive candidates in the legislative branch, in local governments, implementing ranked choice voting. People really need to pay attention to their local elections, understanding that they need to vote to the bottom of their ballot whenever they are voting. And we can't keep seeing basic constitutional rights as partisan issues like anti-racism, climate action, data rights, accountability for social media companies, access to basic needs like healthcare and education. Like, those are not partisan. Those are things that we should all be caring about. I just want to take the time now, before you all say your final thoughts, to just say thank you for playing in this infinite game. Remember, there are no winners and losers. We are all just playing. We're all just players and figuring out what our next role is in the game. I appreciate y'all for your vulnerability, your honesty, your willingness to be open to transformation, and for having these conversations with me. I really appreciate that. So if we really quickly can just do a little takeaway from each of you before we close out. I'll let Ben start. I'm just starting randomly.
I hope I leave with the knowledge that the important thing is to, when listening, really take on what one might just define as the other side. Take on their point of view, really get yourself in their shoes and understand where they're coming from as best you can, what experience they're having, so that you can really genuinely listen, not just listen, but hear.
Baven?
Once again, funnily enough, Ben and I agree. I think, that's been a big takeaway for me, is just, I think we talked about a lot of things, and there's a lot of specific issues that we've had great discussions over. But the core for me over the last 5 weeks is, like Ben said it really well just now, really, really stepping in with the intention to listen and to hear and to receive what other people are saying, and to do your best to know yourself enough to know if you're in a state to receive those things and to take it in. It's just so important to have those open lines of communication and stepping in without judgment. And that's my biggest takeaway. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you all so much I hope people watch the whole arc and see this transformation that's happened, because I think it's just a great example of how things can go, right? Like, we did the thing. There were some big, tough conversations and discussions, and we worked it out. We got through it. And now we're talking about progress. We're back to the point, which is just great. Really encouraging for me. So.
Yeah, for me too. Sada.
Yes, going off of that, again, like, there were some topics that we discussed that I was really unfamiliar with. And there's always, for me, I feel that there is some kind of like shyness, because, I'm like, I'm not from here, and I feel like I find myself, getting quiet or feeling like I'm not welcome to contribute. But I feel like in this space, I felt that what really matters, it's not like these like concerns or fears or whatever, but it's the curiosity to educate myself and to listen and just be curious and ask questions. And this also gives me hope, because sometimes I'm like, where do we start with like radical change? But then, that's where I feel like it starts with this wide awakes, long-term vision and long-term work. These conversations, that's where change starts, because our imagination is very powerful. And by having these clear conversations about how we want things to go, then taking action becomes a lot easier, like in Greek philosophy, they say like that. What do you call it? Like, what was the profession of Jesus?
Carpenter.
A carpenter, like envision like a table.
The profession of Jesus.
Like they see it first in their mind before they create it, and I feel that that's what we're doing here. You know, we're reimagining the future together so that we can make the table together.
Yes, making the table together. Thank you all once again for being players in this infinite game. This is the end of Disquisitive as the 2032 activation, but isn't the end of Disquisitive as we know it. Please be sure to join on Monday for Indigenous Peoples Day and the Election Day celebration. Thank you all so much for being here, Baven, Ben, and Sada, and also everyone who has been tuning in every week. Please vote. Please keep playing in the infinite game, and remember that we all have a role to play in our future. What's yours?